Alright, we're back with part 2 in a video series where we're sharing stories that Neville Goddard shared concerning his own students and how they use the power of their imagination. Now, the purpose of these videos is again to remind you of what other people have been able to do and what you could potentially do if you start using your imagination willingly and with a purpose. So anybody that still doubts in the power of their own mind should definitely pay attention to these stories because they are invaluable. And what do we want to learn? Well, we want to learn for ourselves that imagination can create our reality. So what we want to learn from experience is that if you hold an idea in your imagination, it will move into form over a certain period of time from our observation from this physical side of life. And that's the beautiful part. All these people have shown us that it is possible for their goals. So what will be possible for your goals and your life? Now that is something you always want to have an open mind about, because you'll never know what you're capable of doing exactly with the power of your own imagination. Now let's get right into the stories. Some 15 years ago, Mrs. M and I purchased a lot on which we built a 2-story building housing our office and living area. We left ample space on the lot for an apartment building, if and when our finances would permit. All those years we were busy paying off our mortgage, and at the end of that time had no money for the additional building we still desired so much. It was true that we had an ample savings account which meant security for our business, but to use any part of it for a new building would be to jeopardize that security. But now your teaching awakened a new concept, boldly telling us that we could have what we most desired through the controlled use of our imagination, and that realizing a desire was made more convincing without money. We decided to put it to a test to forget about money and concentrate our attention on the thing we desired most in this world, the new apartment building. With this principle in mind, we mentally constructed the new building as we wanted it, actually drawing physical plans so we could better formulate our mental picture of the completed structure, never forgetting to think from the end. In our case, the completed occupied building, we took many imaginative trips through our apartment house, renting the units to imaginary tenants, examining in detail every room and enjoying the feeling of pride as friends offered congratulations on the unique planning. We brought into our imaginal scene one friend in particular. I shall call her Mrs. X, a lady we had not seen for some time as she had given us up socially, believing us a bit peculiar in our new way of thinking. In our imaginal scene, we took her to the building and asked how she liked it. Hearing her voice distinctly, we had a reply. "Doctor, I think it is beautiful." One day while talking together of our building, my wife mentioned a contractor who had constructed several apartment houses in our neighborhood. We knew of him only by the name that appeared on a sign adjacent to buildings under construction. But realizing that if we were living in the end, we would not be looking for a contractor, we promptly forgot this angle. Continuing these periods of daily imagining for several weeks, we both felt we were now fused with our desire and had successfully been living in the end. One day a stranger entered our office and identified himself as the contractor whose name my wife had mentioned weeks before. In an apologetic manner, he said, "I don't know why I stopped here. I normally don't go see people, but rather people come to see me." He explained that he passed our office often and wondered why there wasn't an apartment building on the corner lot. We assured him we would like very much to have such a building there, but that we had no money to put into the project, not even a few $100s it would take for plans. Our negative response did not faze him, and seemingly compelled, he began to figure and devise ways and means to carry out the job, unasked and unencouraged by us. Forgetting the incident, we were quite startled when a few days later this man called, informing us that plans were completed and that the proposed building would cost us $30,000. We thanked him politely and did absolutely nothing. We knew we had been living imaginatively in the end of a completed building, and that imagination would assemble that building perfectly without any outside assistance from us. So we were not surprised when the contractor called again the next day to say he had found a set of blueprints in his files that fitted our needs perfectly with few alterations. This, we were informed, would save us the architect's fee for new plans. We thanked him again and still did nothing. Logical thinkers would insist that such a negative response from prospective customers would completely end the matter. Instead, 2 days later, the contractor again called with the news that he had located a finance company willing to cover the necessary loan with the exception of a few $1,000s. It sounds incredible, but we still did nothing. For remember, to us this building was completed and rented, and in our imagination we had not put one penny into its construction. The balance of this tale reads like a sequel to Alice in Wonderland. For the contractor came to our office the next day and said, as though presenting us with a gift, "Your people are going to have that new building anyway. I've decided to finance the balance of the loan myself. If this is agreeable, I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers and you can pay me back out of net profits from rentals." This time we did something. We signed the papers and construction began immediately. Most of the apartment units were rented before final completion and all but one occupied the day of completion. We were so thrilled by the seemingly miraculous events of the past few months that for a while we didn't understand this seeming flaw in our imaginal picture. But knowing what we had already accomplished through the power of imagining, we immediately conceived another imaginal scene, and in it, this time, instead of showing the party through the unit and hearing the words, "We'll take it," we ourselves in imagination visited tenants who had already moved in that apartment. We allowed them to show us through the rooms and heard their pleased and satisfied comments. 3 days later that apartment was rented. Our original imaginary drama had objectified itself in every detail save one, and that one became a reality when 1 month later our friend Mrs. X surprised us with a long overdue visit, expressing her desire to see our new building. Gladly we took her through and at the end of the tour heard her speak the line we had heard in our imagination so many weeks before, as with emphasis on each word she said, "Doctor, I think it is beautiful." Our dream of 15 years was realized, and we know now that it could have been realized any time within those 15 years if we had known the secret of imagining and how to live in the end of desire. But now it was realized. Our one big desire was objectified, and we did not put one penny of our own money into it. You know, so many fascinating things can happen once you live from the end, once your mind is dominated by the vision of fulfilled desires, when you can actually feel yourself in possession of what you already want. This happens with any goal we set in life, so this is just another example of how it was done. But now think of your own goals and approach it from this angle in your own case and see what happens. This is the only way we can discover the true power of imagination, is by our own personal experience, by actually using the power of our own minds. Now let's go to the second story. A few months ago my husband decided to place our home on the market. The main object for the move, which we had discussed many times, was to find a home large enough for the two of us. My mother and my aunt, in addition to 10 cats, 3 dogs, and 1 parakeet. Believe it or not, the contemplated move was my husband's idea, as he loved my mother and aunt and said it was their house most of the time anyway, so why not live together and pay one tax bill? I liked the idea tremendously, but I knew that this new home would have to be something very special in size, location and arrangement, as I insisted on privacy for all concerned. So at the moment I was undecided whether to sell our present home or not, but I didn't argue, as I knew quite well from past experience with imagining that our house would never sell until I stopped sleeping in it. 2 months and 4 or 5 real estate brokers later, my husband had given up on the sale of our house, and so had the brokers. At this point I had convinced myself I now wanted to change, so for 4 nights in my imagination I went to sleep in the kind of home I would like to own. On the 5th day, my husband had an appointment at a friend's home, and while there met a stranger who just happened to be looking for a house in the hills. He was of course brought swiftly back to see our house, which he walked through once and said, "I'll buy it." This didn't make us very popular with the brokers, but that was alright with me, as I was happy to keep the broker's commission in the family. We moved within 10 days and stayed with my mother while looking for our new home. We listed our requirements with every agent on the Sunset Strip only, because I wouldn't move out of the area, and each one of them without exception informed us we were both mad. It was entirely impossible, they said, to find an older home of English style, with 2 separate living rooms, separate apartments, a library, and built on a flat knoll with enough ground space to fence for large dogs, and located in one particular area. When we told them the price we would pay for this house, they just looked sad. I said that wasn't all we wanted. We wanted wood paneling all through the house, a huge fireplace, a magnificent view and seclusion, no close neighbors please. At this point the lady agent would giggle and remind me that there was no such house, but if they were, they would realize 5 times what we were willing to pay. But I knew there was such a house because my imagination had been sleeping in it, and if I'm my imagination, then I had been sleeping in it. By the second week we had exhausted 5 real estate offices, and the gentleman in the 6th office was looking a little wild when one of his partners, who had not spoken until then, said, "Why don't you show them the place off King's Road?" A third partner in the office laughed sorely and said, "That property isn't even listed, and besides, the old lady would throw you off the property. She's got 2 acres up there and you know she wouldn't split." Well, I didn't know what she wouldn't split, but my interest had been aroused by the street name, for I liked that particular area best of all. So I asked why not just take a look anyway for laughs. As we drove up the street and turned off onto a private road, we approached a large 2-story house built of redwood and brick, English in appearance, surrounded by tall trees, and sitting alone and aloof on its own knoll, viewing the city below from all of its many windows. I felt a peculiar excitement as we walked to the front door, and we were greeted by a lovely woman who graciously asked us in. I do not think I breathed for the next minute or two, for I had walked into the most exquisite room I had ever seen. The solid redwood walls and the bricks of a great fireplace rose to a height of 28 feet, terminating an arched ceiling joined together by huge redwood beams. The room was straight out of Dickens, and I could almost hear Christmas carolers singing on the balcony of the upstairs dining room, which looked out over the living room. A great cathedral window gave a view of sky, mountains and city far below, and the beautiful old redwood walls glowed in the sunlight. We were shown a spacious apartment on the lower floor with connecting library, separate entrance and separate patio. 2 staircases led upwards to a long hill opening into 2 separate bedrooms and baths, and at the end of the hill was a second living room, opening out onto a second patio, screened by trees and redwood fencing. Built on 2 acres of beautifully landscaped grounds, I began to understand what the agent had meant by saying she wouldn't split, for on 1 acre stood a large swimming pool and pool house, completely separated from the main house, but undoubtedly belonging to it. It did indeed seem to be an impossible situation, as we did not want 2 acres of highly taxable property plus a swimming pool a block away from the house. Before we left, I walked through that magnificent living room, once more going up the stairs to the dining room balcony. I turned and, looking down, saw my husband standing by the fireplace, pipe in hand, with an expression of perfect satisfaction on his face. I placed my hands on the balcony railing and watched him for a moment. When we were back in the real estate office, the 3 agents were ready to close for the day, but my husband detained them, saying, "Let's make her an offer anyway. Maybe she will split the property. What can we lose?" 1 agent left the office without a word. Another said, "The idea is ridiculous." The agent we had originally talked to said, "Forget it. It's a pipe dream." My husband is not easily annoyed, but when he is, there is no more stubborn creature on earth. He was now annoyed. He sat down, slammed his hand on a desk, and roared, "It's your business to submit offers, isn't it?" They agreed that this was so, and finally promised to submit our offer on the property. We left, and that night, in my imagination, I stood in a dining room balcony and looked down at my husband standing by the fireplace. He looked up at me and said, "Well, honey, how do you like our new home?" I said, "I love it." I continued to see the beautiful room and my husband in it, and felt the balcony railing gripped in my hands until I fell asleep. The next day, as we were having dinner in my mother's house, the telephone rang and the agent, in an unbelieving voice, informed me that we had just purchased a house. The owner had split the property right down the middle, giving us the house and the acre it stood on for the price we offered. Now that's quite a wild story. It's a pretty long story, these first 2, I'm not gonna lie, but they're absolutely fascinating, because this woman indeed clearly, every time she went to bed, placed herself inwardly where she wanted to be physically. Now this is something you can do yourself. It's something that I do with my own goals And it's something that, again, I would suggest you do if you haven't done it. Every time you go to bed at night and you close your eyes, just imagine yourself in the possession of what you want to have. Just imagine a scene, as Neville would say, that will imply the fulfillment of your dream. Whether it's moving to a new place, imagine yourself already sleeping in that new place or location. And then you'll magnify yourself. You'll become a magnet that is drawn towards such a location sooner or later. It works for any goal out there in life. You can do the same with financial goals or whatever the goal is, a weight goal. You just place yourself inwardly as if it's already a reality, and then some magic can happen, just like happened with these people out here that wanted to get this building for themselves. And in the end, it also had the consent of the owner, so nothing negative actually happened for anyone involved. Now here we have the third story. Late in July, I wrote to a real estate agent of my desire to sell a piece of land which had been a financial burden to me. His negative reply listed all the reasons why sales were at a standstill in that area, and he forecast a bleak period of waiting until after the first of the year. I received this letter on a Tuesday, and in my imagination, I rewrote it with words indicating that the agent was eager to take my listing. I read his revised letter over and over, and I extended my imaginal drama using your theme of the four mighty ones of our imagination. These four mighty ones are called the producer, the author, the director, and the actor. In my imaginal scene as producer, I suggested the theme: the lot is sold for a profit. As the author, I wrote the simple scene which, to me, implied fulfillment. Standing in the real estate office, I extended my hand to the agent and said, "Thank you, sir." And he replied, "It was a pleasure doing business with you." As director, I rehearsed myself as actor until that scene was vividly real, and I felt the relief which would be mine if the burden were really lifted. 3 days later, the agent I had originally written phoned me saying that he had a deposit for my lot at the price I had specified. I signed the papers in his office the next day. I extended my hand and said, "Thank you, sir." The agent replied, "It was a pleasure doing business with you." 5 days after I had constructed and enacted an imaginal scene, it became a physical reality and was played word for word just as I heard it in my own imagination. The feeling of relief and joy came, not so much from selling the property, but from the proof that my imagined drama worked. Yes, a simple little story and example right there. I think what most people also should remember is that when you hear stories like this, where it seemed to happen so quickly for these people that they had evidence that it worked for them, that we should not be impatient in our own way. So you might have a goal and then assume and hope that it will happen within a day, for example. If it were not to happen within a day, as Neville also would always say, do not say that imagination does not create reality then. The principle works. It is our own impatience that can cause it to be all messed up. So if you can get rid of the idea of impatience and just trust in the process, just focus on your wish fulfilled, no matter how long it would have to take for it to happen. Just live from the feeling as if it's already real, and just enjoy that and that alone, and let the rest take care of itself. Well, then you won't be looking for signs in the outside world all the time, whether your dream is truly manifesting or not. These people clearly showed that they were not specifically focused on the physical world alone. They were mostly focused on how they were using their imagination inside of their own consciousness. Now the fourth story. Last August, while on a blind date, I met a man that I wanted to marry. This happens sometimes, and it happened to me. He was everything I had ever thought of as desirable in a husband. 2 days after this enchanted evening, it was necessary for me to change my place of residence because of my work, and that same week the mutual friend who had introduced me to this man moved away from the city. I realized that the man I had met probably did not know of my new address, and frankly, I was not sure he knew my name. After your last lecture, I spoke to you of this situation. Although I had plenty of other dates, I could not forget this one man. Your lecture was based on revising our day, and after speaking to you, I determined to revise my day every day. Before going to sleep that night, I felt I was in a different bed in my own home, as a married woman, and not as a single working girl, sharing an apartment with 3 other girls. I twisted an imaginary wedding band on my imaginary left hand, saying over and over to myself, "This is wonderful. I really am Mrs. J.E." And I fell asleep in what was, a moment before, a waking dream. I repeated this imaginary scene for 1 month, night after night. The first week in October, he found me. On our second date, I knew my dreams were rightly placed. Your teachings tell us to live in the end of our desire until that desire becomes a fact. So although I did not know how he felt towards me, I continued night after night, living in the feeling of my dream realized. The results? In November he proposed, in January we announced our engagement, and the following May we were married. The loveliest part of it all, however, is that I am happier than I ever dreamed possible, and I know in my heart he is too. Very cute story. It just shows that it can even work in your dating life. I mean, romance, a love life is so important for many people. Sadly, many people as well who settle for less than they could actually have. With that we mean they constantly keep running into bad relationships over and over again. Instead, they should just stop and stand still for a second and wonder and ask themselves, could I use my imagination to manifest a wonderful relationship for myself? Well, here again we have an example that it is possible. Set aside your disbelief and test it out for yourself if it is improvement that you want in your own dating life. Well, this is where I wanted to stop it as well, because this video is already fairly long, because these stories were very long, the first 2 specifically. However, there will be a part 3 of this series anyway very soon, perhaps later this week. But until then, let these stories sink into your mind and wonder, what can I do with the power of imagination to manifest my own dreams? Because we should never forget, dear viewers, that we are the dreamers.